The small cafe sat on a quiet corner of the town, with warm yellow lights spilling onto the sidewalk and the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the air. Inside, the wooden tables had a soft shine, and the chairs, though a bit worn, added a cozy charm. Every evening, people came in for their usual cups of coffee, a slice of cake, and a quiet place to rest. It was a simple place, not fancy but comfortable. Behind the counter moved a young waitress who always seemed to carry a gentle calm with her, even though life had not been easy. She had been working in this cafe for several years. She knew most of the regulars by name and remembered their favorite orders. Some of them liked a strong black coffee, while others preferred tea with just a little milk. The young waitress moved quietly and quickly, balancing plates and cups, pouring drinks, and smiling politely at the customers. She never complained, even when the cafe got crowded and the orders kept coming faster and faster. She had learned early that patience and kindness mattered more than rushing or showing frustration. The cafe had an old piano in the corner, its dark wood scratched and worn from years of use. Most people ignored it. It was there more as decoration than anything else. The young waitress, however, saw something different in it. When she had a free moment, she would sit down and touch the keys gently. She didn't play loud or fast. She played softly, as if speaking to the piano in a secret language only they understood. She had learned to play as a child, lessons she took for a few years before life became busy. Music had always been a comfort, a way to express feelings that words could not, and though she rarely had an audience, she found peace in each note she played. Even on her busiest days, she would sometimes pause near the piano when the cafe was quiet. It was a small act, a brief escape from the routines of cleaning tables and serving drinks. Her fingers would hover above the keys, and then she would let a simple melody flow. No one ever asked her to play, and she rarely thought anyone was listening, but it gave her hope. Music had a way of making the world feel bigger, gentler, and less lonely. The young waitress had a life outside the cafe, though it was not easy. She had family responsibilities that often weighed on her. There were bills to pay, chores at home, and small daily struggles that seemed to pile up, one on top of another. Yet she never let the heaviness of her life show in her work. She smiled, greeted customers warmly, and moved with a quiet grace. There was a strength in her that was subtle, not loud or showy. People noticed her politeness, but they did not always see the depth of her heart. This particular evening was ordinary, the kind of evening that could pass without notice. The sky was cloudy, and a soft drizzle had begun outside, creating little puddles along the street. Inside, a few customers were scattered around the cafe, reading, typing on laptops, or quietly talking to friends. The young waitress moved from table to table, refilling drinks and clearing empty plates. She said kind words, offered a smile here and there, and listened to the small concerns of the customers. It was the rhythm of life she knew well. When the last of the customers had ordered their dessert and the cafe was beginning to empty, she glanced at the piano. A quiet longing filled her heart. She walked over slowly, brushing her hands against the worn keys. For a few minutes, she just touched them, feeling the smooth surface beneath her fingers. Then she began to play a simple tune, one she had learned long ago. It was soft and gentle, not meant to impress anyone, just to exist in the space around her. The melody floated through the cafe, soft as a whisper. At first, no one seemed to notice. A man reading a newspaper turned a page. A woman at the corner table sipped her tea, lost in thought. But gradually, the sound of the piano began to fill the room in a different way. It wasn't loud or showy, but it had a certain calm that seemed to settle over the cafe. The noise of the street outside, the clatter of dishes, and even the ticking of the clock faded into the background. It was just the piano and the young waitress letting music speak in the quiet moments. Her fingers moved with care, pressing each key with a gentle touch. She didn't need to think too hard about what to play. The music came from somewhere deeper, a place in her heart that had learned to hope, dream, and feel even in hard times. She remembered her childhood lessons, the hours she had spent practicing, the small moments of triumph when a song sounded right. Those memories filled her as she played, and they gave a warmth to the melody. As she continued, she found herself smiling quietly. She thought about the people who had come and gone, the ones who had barely noticed her presence, and the ones who might listen without judgment. She thought about the cafe, a small, ordinary place that had become her stage without her even realizing it. Music had a way of turning ordinary moments into something extraordinary. Even a simple tune could carry emotions that words could not. The young waitress did not know it, but the atmosphere of the cafe had begun to shift. The man with the newspaper looked up and a faint smile appeared on his face. The woman sipping tea set her cup down, listening intently to the melody. A quiet hush fell over the room, not because she demanded it, but because the music invited it. It was as if the piano and the young waitress were speaking directly to the hearts of those who were willing to listen. She played for several minutes, letting the music flow naturally. There were no grand gestures, no complicated notes, just a simple tune that carried honesty, warmth, and a sense of calm. Each note seemed to find its place in the room, creating small ripples in the hearts of the listeners. For a moment, the worries of the day seemed to disappear, replaced by something softer, gentler. After a while, the young waitress stopped playing. She rested her hands on the keys and took a quiet breath. The room was still, filled with a gentle energy that had not been there before. The few customers left were changed in a small way. They felt lighter, more at ease, and even happier than when they had entered. The music had done its work, even if no one could explain exactly why. She stood up, straightened her apron, and returned to her tasks with the same quiet grace as before. Nothing about her life had changed in that instant, and yet something had shifted. There was a small spark of possibility, a feeling that perhaps her music could reach beyond the walls of the cafe, touch more hearts, and even change a few lives along the way. The young waitress moved through the rest of the evening with calm confidence. She cleared tables, refilled drinks, and offered kind words. But inside, a small seed of hope had taken root. She realized that even the simplest actions, like playing a quiet tune on an old piano, could create moments of connection and beauty in an ordinary world. And for the first time in a long while, she felt that maybe her life too could hold a quiet kind of magic. The next evening, the cafe felt busier than usual. A storm had been forecasted, and people were seeking warmth and shelter from the cold rain outside. The young waitress moved quickly behind the counter, pouring steaming cups of coffee and arranging slices of pie for the customers who were slowly trickling in. The cafe had a warm, inviting glow, and the sound of rain tapping against the windows created a quiet rhythm that mixed with the clinking of cups and plates. A group of people arrived, slightly drenched and looking tense. They had come in after a long day, carrying the weight of their own worries, and they filled a large table in the center of the cafe. Their conversation was quiet at first, filled with sighs and low murmurs. One of them dropped a newspaper on the table with a frustrated thud, while another tapped impatiently on a phone. The air around their table was heavy with exhaustion and stress. The young waitress approached them with a polite smile, taking their drink orders carefully. She could sense the tension, but she treated them as she always did, with warmth and patience. She moved back and forth from their table, making sure their orders were correct, topping up drinks when necessary and saying a few soft, encouraging words. Despite their initial irritation, she did not falter. She continued her work calmly, letting her presence be a small comfort. The cafe owner, a middle-aged man who had known the young waitress for years, noticed her calm demeanor. He had often seen her quietly handling difficult situations without complaint. Today, he decided to make a small joke, hoping to lighten the mood. He leaned over to her and said in a low voice, "Why don't you play something on the piano? Might cheer them up a little." She hesitated. Playing in front of people was not something she did often. Usually she played when the cafe was empty, or when no one was paying attention. The thought of performing for a group, even just a small one, made her feel nervous. But she glanced at the piano in the corner, the old familiar instrument, and a small spark of courage lit inside her. She nodded gently, and the cafe owner gave her an encouraging smile before returning to his tasks. She walked toward the piano slowly, her heart beating a little faster with each step. The rain outside tapped softly against the windows, and the warm light of the cafe seemed to shine brighter around her. She sat down on the piano bench, adjusted her posture, and let her fingers hover above the keys. For a moment, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath, centering herself in the space around her. Then she began to play. At first, it was a simple tune, soft and gentle. She did not play anything complicated or fast. The melody was quiet, almost tentative, like a whisper. The customers, including the tense group at the center table, did not immediately notice. Their conversation continued in low tones and a few people continued working on their laptops. But gradually the music began to fill the cafe, and it carried a subtle warmth that was hard to ignore. The people at the central table slowed their conversation, glancing toward the piano. The soft notes seemed to reach inside them, creating a sense of calm. The frustrated tapping on the phone paused and the sighs quieted. Even the man who had slammed the newspaper down earlier straightened in his chair, listening more attentively. The young waitress continued to play, her fingers moving gently across the keys. Each note was placed with care, carrying a quiet honesty and emotion that seemed to settle over the room. As she played, she allowed herself to let the music flow naturally. She did not focus on the technical perfection of the notes, but on the feelings they could carry. She thought about her own life, the struggles she faced, and the quiet moments of joy that music had brought her. Those thoughts guided her hands, creating a melody that was simple, but filled with heart. It was the kind of music that did not demand attention, but invited it, slowly and gently. The tension around the table began to soften. The group of people, initially irritated and restless, started to sit a little straighter. They exchanged small glances, and a few smiles appeared as the melody wound its way through the room. The cafe owner, watching from the counter, could not hide his surprise. He had expected little from a simple tune, but the way it had captured the attention of the customers was remarkable. Other patrons in the cafe also began to notice. A woman who had been quietly reading put down her book and listened. A man at a corner table, usually lost in his own thoughts, leaned back and closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. Even the sound of the rain outside seemed to blend with the piano, creating a soft, comforting harmony. The young waitress felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, knowing that her music was touching people, even if just in a small way. As she continued, she grew more confident. She let the melody become a little more expressive, adding subtle variations in tempo and rhythm. The music began to tell a story, one of quiet resilience and hope. The group at the central table now listened fully, their earlier frustration replaced by curiosity and calm. They exchanged smiles and small nods, caught in the unexpected beauty of the moment. Some of them whispered to each other, acknowledging the change in the atmosphere, though none of them could explain why it felt so different. The young waitress noticed the change too. Her fingers moved more freely, and she felt a warmth in her chest as she played. Music had always been her refuge, and now it was becoming a bridge between herself and the people around her. She realized that even a simple tune could create connection and understanding, even without words. Each note carried a piece of her story, her emotions, and her quiet hope. The cafe owner, who had been observing quietly, decided to step away and let her continue. He knew better than to interrupt a moment like this. Instead, he focused on helping other customers, occasionally glancing back at the piano with a smile. The music had transformed the atmosphere in a subtle but undeniable way. The warm light of the cafe, the sound of the rain, and the soft piano notes combined to create a feeling of comfort and calm. Minutes passed, though it felt longer and shorter at the same time. The young waitress played without pause, letting her emotions guide her hands. She noticed small reactions from the group at the central table, a hand resting on a chair, a foot tapping slightly, eyes meeting with unspoken understanding. She realized that the music was doing more than filling the space. It was creating a shared experience, a moment of connection among strangers. Eventually, she brought the tune to a gentle close. Her fingers lingered on the last note, and she exhaled softly. The room was quiet, but the silence was no longer heavy or tense. It was warm, filled with the lingering presence of the music and the emotions it had stirred. The group at the central table looked at her with gratitude and surprise, as if they had been given an unexpected gift. They thanked her softly, their voices tinged with awe. The young waitress smiled quietly, feeling a mixture of relief and satisfaction. She returned to her tasks behind the counter, refilling drinks and clearing tables with the same gentle care as before. Yet inside she felt a shift, a small spark of confidence and hope. She had shared her music with others, and it had made a difference, even in a brief, fleeting way. The memory of the attentive eyes and soft smiles lingered, reminding her of the power she had carried within her all along. The cafe continued to hum with quiet life. Patrons sipped their drinks, talked in low voices, and occasionally glanced toward the piano. The young waitress moved among them, attentive and kind, carrying the warmth of the music in her heart. She realized that this simple act, playing a tune on a quiet evening, had transformed the space around her. It was a reminder that even small gestures done with care and sincerity could touch the lives of others in ways that were meaningful and lasting. As the night wore on, the rain began to ease, leaving soft puddles on the streets outside. The cafe gradually emptied, and the young waitress had a moment to herself. She walked back to the piano, her fingers brushing lightly against the keys. She did not play again, not yet. Instead, she simply sat and let herself reflect on the evening. The memory of the faces she had touched, the calm she had created, and the quiet sense of connection filled her with a deep sense of gratitude. For the first time in a long while, she felt a small but steady certainty. Her music had value, and sharing it could create moments of beauty and understanding in the world. She realized that her life, though ordinary in many ways, held the potential for extraordinary moments. And she understood that even the simplest actions, guided by sincerity and heart, could leave a lasting impact on others. The next evening, the cafe was quieter than usual. A soft drizzle had started outside, creating small ripples in the puddles along the streets. Inside, the warm light reflected off the wooden tables, and the smell of coffee and fresh pastries filled the air. The young waitress moved with her usual calm, balancing trays and greeting the few customers who had come in. Her mind, however, lingered on the previous night. She could still feel the subtle shift in the cafe's atmosphere, the small but meaningful change she had brought with her music. As she went about her duties, she found herself glancing at the piano in the corner more than usual. It was an old instrument, slightly worn, but to her it held endless possibilities. She had practiced for years, yet she rarely played for anyone other than herself. There was always a fear of being judged, of not being good enough, even though her heart knew otherwise. Tonight, however, there was a quiet urging within her, a gentle push to let her music speak more fully than it had before. The few customers in the cafe were quietly engaged with their own worlds. One man sat at a table with a newspaper, another woman typed on a laptop, and a young couple whispered softly over a shared pastry. The cafe was a place of comfort and quiet routines, and the young waitress moved among them with care, attentive to their needs. She refilled coffee cups, cleared plates, and offered warm smiles, all while her thoughts kept drifting toward the piano. A small break came, a moment when no orders needed attention, and the cafe felt still. She walked over to the piano, brushing her fingers across the keys lightly. She sat down, closed her eyes, and let the memories of her childhood lessons fill her mind. She thought about the hours she had spent practicing, the small victories and mistakes, and the joy she had found in every note. Then slowly she began to play. This time she allowed herself to play a melody that was more expressive, more heartfelt. The tune was soft at first, delicate, but gradually it became richer and more emotional. She let the music reflect her life, the struggles, the hopes, the quiet dreams that had carried her through difficult times. Each note seemed to carry a part of her story, and she felt a warmth in her chest as she played. The cafe, small as it was, seemed to hold its breath and listen. The few customers who were present began to notice. The man with the newspaper set it down, his eyes drawn to the piano. The woman at the laptop paused her typing, her hands resting gently on the keyboard as she listened. Even the young couple stopped whispering and turned their attention toward the music. It was not loud or demanding, but it had a gentle power, an ability to draw people in without words or gestures. The melody flowed naturally, carrying a sense of vulnerability and hope. As she played, she let herself remember the difficult moments of her life, the challenges she faced, and the quiet strength that had kept her moving forward. She thought about the long hours working in the cafe, the tired days at home, and the moments when she had doubted herself. Those feelings infused the music with depth, giving it an authenticity that touched everyone who listened. She was no longer just playing a tune. She was telling a story, sharing a piece of herself with the world. The atmosphere in the cafe began to change. The tension that sometimes lingered in small spaces melted away, replaced by a sense of connection. The customers, once wrapped in their own concerns, found themselves drawn into the music. Some closed their eyes, letting the melody wash over them. Others leaned back in their chairs, a small smile appearing on their faces. The young waitress continued to play, unaware of the full effect she was having but feeling the quiet satisfaction of sharing something deeply personal. She noticed small reactions that warmed her heart. The man with the newspaper adjusted his posture, a thoughtful expression on his face. The woman at the laptop smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with an emotion she could not put into words. The young couple held hands, a quiet connection strengthened by the music that filled the room. Even the cafe owner standing behind the counter watched in quiet admiration. He had known her as a kind and diligent waitress, but he had never realized the depth of her musical talent. The young waitress continued to explore the piano, allowing the melody to become more complex and expressive. Her fingers moved with confidence and ease, guided by emotion rather than rigid technique. She played not to impress but to communicate, to create a shared experience between herself and the people around her. The notes rose and fell, soft and gentle in some places, strong and determined in others, like a conversation without words. She felt a quiet joy as she played. Music had always been her refuge, a place where she could express feelings too deep for words. Now she realized it could also be a bridge between herself and the world. The customers were not just listening. They were experiencing something together, a moment of connection and understanding that transcended ordinary conversation. The cafe, small and humble as it was, became a space of shared emotion, a place where hearts could meet quietly through the language of music. Minutes passed. Though it felt like time had stretched and shrunk all at once, the young waitress played with full attention, letting the melody carry her thoughts and emotions. She thought about the people listening, about the impact that even a small heartfelt action could have. She understood that her music was more than just notes on a page. It was a way to reach others, to share herself in a way that words could never capture. When she finally brought the piece to a gentle close, there was a quiet pause in the cafe. The music lingered in the air, a soft presence that seemed to wrap around everyone in the room. The customers looked up from their tables, eyes meeting hers with a mixture of surprise, admiration, and gratitude. Some whispered softly to each other, acknowledging the power of the music they had just heard. It was a moment of connection that needed no explanation, a shared understanding that passed silently between them. The young waitress smiled quietly, feeling a sense of fulfillment that she had rarely experienced. She returned to her work behind the counter, refilling coffee cups and clearing plates, but the energy in the cafe had shifted. The customers seemed lighter, more relaxed and more attentive to one another. The warmth of the music had created a subtle bond, a gentle reminder that small acts of sharing could bring people together in meaningful ways. She noticed that the cafe owner had a soft smile on his face, his eyes reflecting the quiet pride he felt. He had always known she was talented in her own way, but this was different. He realized that her music had the ability to transform the ordinary, to bring warmth and emotion into a space that might otherwise remain routine and predictable. It was a revelation, both for him and for the customers who had been touched by her playing. The young waitress moved among the tables, attending to the needs of the patrons with the same care and attention as always. Yet inside, she felt a new sense of confidence. She understood that her music could create moments of beauty, connection, and even healing. It was not about recognition or applause. It was about sharing a part of herself with the world and witnessing the quiet impact it could have. As the evening drew on and the rain outside slowed to a soft drizzle, she found herself once again near the piano. This time she did not play, but she let her hands rest on the keys, feeling the smooth surface beneath her fingers. She reflected on the power of music and the ways it could touch hearts, even in a small cafe on a rainy evening. She realized that her journey was just beginning, that her talent could reach further and create more moments of connection than she had ever imagined. The cafe emptied slowly, leaving behind the warm glow of lights and the lingering scent of coffee. The young waitress sat quietly, feeling the weight of the day and the quiet satisfaction of what she had shared. She understood that her life, though ordinary in many ways, was filled with opportunities to create beauty and meaning. And she knew that as long as she was willing to share her music, even in the simplest ways, she could make a difference, one note at a time. In that quiet moment, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. For the piano, for the customers who had listened, and for the gift of music itself. She understood that life could be challenging and uncertain, but it also held the potential for extraordinary moments of connection and joy. and she resolved silently but firmly to continue playing, to continue sharing, and to continue allowing her music to touch the hearts of those around her. The next evening, the cafe was alive with the usual quiet hum of conversation and the occasional clatter of cups. Outside, the sky had cleared after days of rain, and the streets reflected the soft light from the cafe windows. The young waitress moved behind the counter with her familiar grace, attending to the needs of the few customers scattered throughout the room. Her mind was still buzzing from the previous nights, from the way her music had touched people, and she felt a gentle excitement about the evening ahead. A group of new customers arrived, this time larger than usual. They were a mix of people who had come in from work, carrying the weight of their day, and some who were just seeking a warm place to relax. The cafe owner welcomed them warmly and gestured toward the young waitress. She took their orders with a calm smile, moving efficiently but with care, making each person feel seen and valued. One of the customers, an older man with a kind expression, noticed the piano in the corner. He looked at the young waitress with curiosity, as if he sensed something special about her. He asked softly, "Do you play?" She hesitated for a moment, but the spark of courage from the past evenings returned. She nodded quietly, feeling a mix of nervousness and anticipation. The cafe owner, seeing the potential for something special, leaned toward her and whispered, "Go ahead. Play something for them. I think they'd like it." She took a deep breath and walked toward the piano, the familiar weight of anticipation resting lightly on her shoulders. She sat down on the bench, her fingers brushing the keys lightly, and closed her eyes. The moment felt different this time. She was not just playing for herself. She was sharing something deeply personal with a room full of strangers who were open to receiving it. She began with a soft, gentle melody, allowing the notes to flow naturally. This time she played with more confidence, her hands moving with ease and purpose. The customers paused their conversations, drawn to the sound of the piano. The older man smiled warmly, and a few others turned in their chairs, their eyes reflecting curiosity and anticipation. The young waitress let her emotions guide her fingers, letting the music tell a story of resilience, hope, and quiet strength. As the melody continued, the atmosphere in the cafe began to shift. The chatter of conversation softened, replaced by a shared sense of calm and attentiveness. The customers who had come in tired and burdened found themselves drawn into the music. Some closed their eyes, letting the notes wash over them. Others leaned forward, captivated by the sincerity and depth of the performance. The young waitress played with her whole heart, unaware of the full impact she was having, yet feeling a quiet satisfaction as she noticed small smiles and attentive gazes. A few customers quietly approached the piano when she finished the first piece. They spoke softly, expressing their appreciation and surprise at the beauty of her music. One woman said, "I didn't expect this. You play so beautifully." Another man added, "Your music, it really changes the room. Thank you." The young waitress felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had always loved music, but hearing that it could touch others in such a direct and meaningful way was a revelation. Encouraged by the responses, she began another piece. This time the melody was more expressive, more emotional. She allowed herself to explore the deeper parts of her feelings, drawing on memories of struggles, small victories, and quiet dreams that had carried her through difficult times. The music became a story, not just for herself, but for everyone listening. Each note seemed to resonate with something universal, something that connected all the people in the cafe. The older man who had first noticed the piano watched with admiration. He leaned closer and whispered to the woman next to him, "She has a gift. This isn't just playing, it's something more." The young waitress, absorbed in her performance, did not hear the comment, but she felt the energy in the room shift. The customers were no longer passive listeners. They were participants in the experience, moved by the music in a way that transcended words. The cafe owner, standing behind the counter, observed quietly. He had known the young waitress for years, but he had never realized the depth of her talent. He felt a surge of pride and gratitude. The cafe, usually a place of routine and familiarity, had become a space of transformation. The music had not only changed the atmosphere, but had also created a connection between strangers who might otherwise have remained isolated in their own thoughts. After finishing the second piece, the young waitress paused, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. The room was silent, but the silence was filled with a sense of awe and appreciation. The customers looked at her with gratitude and admiration, some whispering softly to one another, sharing the impact they had felt. The young waitress felt a mixture of humility and joy. She had shared something personal, and it had been received with openness and warmth. A few customers approached her afterward, asking about her background in music. She shared modestly about her childhood lessons and the small amount of practice she had been able to do over the years. One woman, who seemed particularly moved, asked if she had ever considered performing in a larger setting. The young waitress smiled softly, unsure but touched by the suggestion. She had always played for herself or in the quiet moments at the cafe, never imagining that her music could reach beyond these walls. The older man, who had been watching attentively, approached as well. He introduced himself as a retired music teacher and expressed a desire to hear more of her playing in the future. He offered gentle advice and encouragement, speaking with a kindness that made her feel seen and understood. The young waitress felt a deep sense of validation. For the first time, someone recognized her talent and encouraged her to explore it further. The evening continued with a warm, lively energy. The customers, once strangers with their own separate worries, now shared a subtle bond created by the music. Conversations became lighter, smiles more frequent, and laughter more genuine. The young waitress moved among them with grace, refilling drinks and clearing plates, carrying the warmth and connection she had helped create. The cafe felt transformed, not by decoration or special events, but by the simple act of sharing something authentic and heartfelt. As the night progressed, the young waitress found herself reflecting on the experience. She realized that her music had the power to touch hearts and create moments of connection that went beyond words. She had always known that music was meaningful, but experiencing its effect firsthand was profound. She felt a quiet determination to continue playing, to continue sharing, and to continue exploring the depth of her own talent. By the time the cafe emptied and the lights dimmed, she felt a sense of fulfillment that she had rarely experienced. The music had not only touched others but had also affirmed her own sense of purpose. She understood that her gift was not just for herself, it was something to be shared, a way to create moments of beauty and understanding in the world. The evening had shown her that even in a small, ordinary cafe, extraordinary experiences could unfold when one allowed their heart to guide them. The young waitress cleaned up the cafe, arranging chairs and wiping tables, but her thoughts remained with the music and the people who had been touched by it. She glanced once more at the piano, feeling a mixture of gratitude and anticipation. She knew that this was only the beginning, that her talent could reach further and create even more meaningful connections. The memory of the evening, of the smiles and quiet admiration, stayed with her, a reminder of the power of sharing one's gifts with courage and sincerity. The next evening, the cafe was quiet but filled with a warm, inviting glow. Outside, the streets were calm, reflecting the soft lights from the windows. Inside, the smell of coffee and pastries lingered in the air, mixing with the faint sound of raindrops from an earlier shower. The young waitress moved behind the counter with her usual grace, her mind still reflecting on the past few nights. Each evening had shown her a new side of herself, a side that could touch hearts and create moments of connection through her music. The cafe was busier than usual tonight, and several familiar faces were there, along with a few new patrons. The young waitress greeted them all with her gentle smile, taking orders and moving between tables with quiet efficiency. Her heart was full of anticipation. The piano in the corner seemed to call to her, reminding her of the power her music held and the joy it had already brought to so many people. She felt a quiet excitement, a sense that tonight could be special. A few customers were chatting in the corner while others worked quietly on their laptops or sipped coffee. The cafe owner noticed the young waitress glancing at the piano and, with a small smile, whispered, "Play for them tonight. I think they're ready." She nodded, feeling a mixture of nervousness and confidence. It had been a journey to arrive at this moment, but she trusted herself and her music. She walked toward the piano, her fingers brushing lightly against the keys as she sat down. Closing her eyes, she let her hands find the familiar positions. Feeling the worn keys beneath her fingertips, she began to play, starting with a soft, gentle melody that gradually grew richer and more expressive. This was no ordinary tune. It was a piece she had composed herself, a reflection of her journey, her struggles, and her dreams. Each note carried her story, and she felt the music resonate within her as she shared it with the room. The customers were immediately drawn in. Those who had been quietly chatting paused, looking toward the piano with curiosity. The ones who had been working on laptops set their hands down, captivated by the melody. Even the cafe owner standing behind the counter watched in admiration. The young waitress played with her whole heart, letting the music guide her fingers and her emotions flow freely. It was a performance, but not for recognition. She played to connect, to share a piece of herself with those around her. As the melody filled the cafe, a sense of calm and warmth spread through the room. Customers began to smile, some closing their eyes and letting the music wash over them. Conversations quieted, replaced by a shared experience that was invisible but deeply felt. The young waitress felt a profound connection with the people in the room, a silent understanding that transcended words. Her music had become a bridge, linking hearts in a way that was simple, genuine, and powerful. Minutes passed, but it felt both longer and shorter than time itself. She allowed the music to explore its full depth, expressing moments of quiet reflection, gentle hope, and subtle joy. Each note was intentional, carrying a message of resilience and kindness. The cafe, once a place of routine, had become a sanctuary for those present. Strangers sat together in quiet camaraderie, united by the shared experience of music that touched them in unexpected ways. After finishing the first piece, she paused for a moment, letting the silence settle in the room. There were soft expressions of admiration and gentle whispers of appreciation. Some customers approached her, thanking her for the music and sharing how it had affected them. One woman said, "I didn't expect this, but your music, it made everything feel lighter." Another man added, "It's amazing how a simple tune can change the whole mood of a place." The young waitress smiled quietly, feeling warmth and fulfillment. She had always loved music, but hearing how it impacted others brought a new depth of satisfaction. Encouraged by the response, she began another piece, one that was more personal and expressive. This melody reflected her own journey, the quiet determination that had carried her through difficult times, and the hope she held for the future. Her fingers moved with confidence, guided by emotion rather than strict technique. The customers were captivated, leaning forward, closing their eyes, and letting the music speak directly to their hearts. The older man, who had noticed her talent before, approached after the second piece. He introduced himself as a retired music teacher and offered to provide guidance and mentorship. His words were gentle and encouraging, emphasizing the potential he saw in her talent. The young waitress felt a deep sense of gratitude and humility. For the first time, someone had recognized her abilities in a way that felt genuine and supportive. She realized that her music could take her further than she had ever imagined. The cafe owner, who had witnessed the transformation, quietly observed the reactions of the patrons. People who had entered stressed, tired, or distracted were now engaged and connected, their faces reflecting calm, joy, and appreciation. The young waitress had created a space where ordinary moments were transformed into something extraordinary, simply through the act of sharing her gift. He felt a quiet pride and knew that this was something special, not just for the cafe but for the community that had gathered there. As the evening continued, more customers joined in the appreciation. Some requested songs they remembered from childhood, while others simply listened, letting the music guide their thoughts and emotions. The young waitress played with sensitivity and care, allowing each piece to tell its own story. The cafe was alive with energy that was gentle but powerful, a reminder of the beauty that could emerge when one shared their talents wholeheartedly. The young waitress noticed the subtle changes in the people around her. Strangers were engaging in quiet conversations, smiles were more frequent, and there was a sense of community in the room. Her music had not only reached individuals, but had brought them together in a shared moment of connection. She realized that her gift could do more than entertain. It could inspire, comfort, and unite people in ways that words alone could not. By the time the cafe began to empty, the young waitress felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had shared her music, touched hearts, and witnessed the quiet transformation of her surroundings. The patrons left with smiles, offering words of thanks and encouragement. Some mentioned how the music had lifted their spirits, while others expressed a desire to return to experience it again. She understood that her journey had only just begun, that her music could continue to create meaningful experiences for others. After cleaning up and arranging the cafe for the next day, she returned to the piano one last time. She touched the keys lightly, reflecting on the journey she had taken over the past evenings. Each performance, each note, had taught her something about herself and the power of sharing her gift. She realized that even in the simplest acts like playing a piano in a small cafe, she could make a difference. Music had become not just a personal refuge, but a way to connect, inspire, and create beauty in the lives of others. She sat quietly, listening to the faint echoes of the music that had filled the room, feeling a sense of peace and accomplishment. Her life, though still humble and ordinary in many ways, had been touched by moments of extraordinary connection and meaning. She understood that her talent, combined with courage and sincerity, could bring light into the world, and she felt a quiet determination to continue playing, to continue sharing, and to continue letting her music transform ordinary moments into something remarkable. As she closed the cafe for the night and stepped outside, the streets were calm and quiet, reflecting the warm glow from the windows. She felt a sense of hope and possibility, knowing that her journey was far from over. The music would continue, reaching hearts and inspiring moments of connection wherever she played. And in that knowledge, she found a profound sense of joy, purpose, and fulfillment, carrying her forward into the days to come.